Hey there guys, this is Victor with VictorVectorJKU. We're back in the garage and today we're going to be covering how to go about installing the beadlock rings on the Dirty Life 9303 DT-1s. In my first video covering my initial impressions of the Dirty Life wheels, I kind of went through and explained a little bit about what my intents were with these wheels and what my plan was with running the ABS plastic beauty ring. But what I ended up doing was I reached out to Dirty Life because after having felt these, when I mentioned in the video before, they felt a little bit, we'll say fragile. They didn't seem like they would be something that would really hold up to any impacts into rocks or going up against stumps or roots on the trails, which is basically what I live in up here in Washington. And so I reached out to them and asked, hey, so this is the kind of wheeling that I do, and I'm curious, will the simulated beadlock rings that you guys have hold up on the trail? And they got back to me pretty quick, and they said, they're really just a cosmetic ring. They're not meant for functional use. So with that being known, I was like, okay, crap. Guess I need to get into that pretty quick because I don't want to run into an issue of damaging the beauty ring and potentially causing so much damage to it that I might have one of the fasteners get caught and damage the mounting surface where the beadlock goes, or damaging the threads that will hold the beadlock in place on the wheel. So after that, a little bit of thought, figured out, okay, let's go ahead and get these on order. So order them up and they just arrived today. And I'm actually in a little bit of a rush. I'm going wheeling up at Walker Valley tomorrow morning with my buddy Tyler. Really quick, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the DT-1 and the dual tech technology that they have built into these. So basically you can mount these tires as a traditional wheel and tire package, which basically you can see the outside of the bead of the tire is on the inside bead of the wheel. And the cosmetic ring here, you can see it has this this lip that comes out, and so what that does is when this is on, it actually will cover where the beadlock mounting surface is, and it doesn't create a gap there. Whereas when we start looking into the beadlock ring, so you can see that this guy actually has the mounted surface, then it recedes back, and that's to allow for the tire to fit in. And again, you have the similar symmetrical profile on the wheel. So this just allows for a certain gap that the bead of the tire is able to sit into, and that's what will create the clamping pressure, hold air, and prevent the tire from spinning on the bead of the wheel. And then you can see there's some sort of X pattern that goes around the wheel here, as well as a knurled edge on the inside of the wheel here. And what that all is for is, again, to prevent the tire from spinning on the wheel. So cool technology that this wheel can run both a traditional style or it can run as a true functional beadlock. And honestly, I'm pretty excited to be switching over to the beadlock. It'll enable me to be able to run at lower tire pressures, not have to worry about losing a bead. Granted, I have never had an issue with losing a bead, and I've run down to about 10 PSI quite frequently. And I think I've maybe even gone down as low as 8. But granted, I am also running with a D-rated tire, so it does have a stronger sidewall, and I think that's probably the reason why I haven't run into an issue with de-beading. Only has happened to me once, and that was out at Reader RV area. But enough about that, let's talk a little bit more about the beadlock ring and its mounting procedure. So, when you purchase a set of wheels through Dirty Life, they provide you with an instruction sheet that basically lines out how you need to go about installing the beadlock wheels. They do have several warnings here. They do suggest using a professional installer to install the beadlock rings due to improper installation could lead to damage and failure of the wheel. They do not cover any damage due to improper installation. And in addition, they cover the instructions for how to mount the tire on the wheel along with installing the beadlock ring. Now, granted, my tires are already installed on the tires as a traditional wheel and tire package, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be deflating the tires, pulling the valve stem, breaking the bead, and then taking the bead of the tire, putting it to the outside of the wheel, and then installing the beadlock ring on. So My process won't cover the entire instruction. Now, there is one thing that I'm not quite sure about just yet, and I'm got my fingers crossed right now. There are some tires that have a thicker bead on the tires. So basically what's on the inside of the wheel right now, there are some tires that are thicker and some are thinner, and that can cause interference with the mounting of the beadlock ring. For a proper installation, Dirty Life states that once the beadlock ring is installed with the tire, there should be no gap between the mating surface of the beadlock ring and the mating surface on the wheel. If there is, it's an improper installation, and that can cause damage. So if that's the case for you, then you need to reach out to Dirty Life. They'll provide you with the contact of who to reach out to that specializes in fabricating the specific beadlock spacer that you need to purchase. And in my conversations with Dirty Life, there's only one spacer that they offer. So basically you will run with a spacer or without a spacer based on the tire that you're running. And my thought is I'm probably going to need to run a spacer because I'm running a D-rated tire. This is a truck tire, not a typical car tire. And so I have kind of a hunch that I'm going to be running a thicker bead on that tire than what's going to work with this. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. So let's go ahead and get this tire out in the middle of the garage here. I'm going to go ahead and start deflating it and get to work. Alright guys, so first thing we're going to start off with here is I'm going to go ahead and pull the valve stem and let all the air out of the tire. Alright, so all the air's been drained out of the tire now. So what I like to do to help break the bead is I'll actually use a high lift jack and jack off the side of my Jeep. And I just basically use a towel to protect the tire from the base of the jack. Not necessary, I just like to do it so it doesn't get all scarred up. That and also protect the wheel in case it comes in any contact while doing so. Basically all I do is put it in place, have it pretty close to the wheel. Alright, there we go. Alright, so we have the tire debeaded from the wheel. Next up, what we're going to be doing is I have 3 tire bars that I'm going to use, and pick these guys up from Harbor Freight. They're just 24-inch, and they call them lock ring tools. So they didn't have the 24-inch tire bar that I was actually particularly looking for. So these ones have a little bit more of a hook on this end, but it does have a flat end over here. So I'm going to give these guys a shot. Hopefully this will work out for me and I can go ahead and get this tire brought around. So in preparation, before I start doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a liberal amount of soapy water around the wheel and the tire. And that should help aid it coming over and being brought outside of the wheel. And then I'm also going to use just a towel around the wheel just to kind of protect the beadlock surface. And what I'm going to do is going to get one under. And actually I think it works best if I can get both of these in to start with. That way I can get 2 going. So I'm going to get that in there first. Got my towel placed. What I can do is get one up over. Follow through with the other one. And I'm just going to keep working around the wheel and the tire, continuing to move the bead out. And then I just keep replacing the tire bar as I go. And just like that, we have the tire outside of the wheel. All right, so let's go ahead and get that guy kind of put in place. I'm gonna go and wipe down the tire now. All right, then we'll go ahead and bring our beadlock ring over, put him into place. All right, so basically what I'm gonna be doing here is I'm gonna be using the supplied hardware. It's going to be all the bolts and washers to mount the beadlock ring. And what they recommend is you start with a 12 o'clock, then you move on to a 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock position to start with mounting them. And we're going to just hand tighten those in to start with, and then we'll go and put in the rest. Alright, so what I did was I just used my impact driver just to put the heads of the fasteners down to the beadlock ring, just save some time. Of course, I didn't over tighten them at all. I didn't even hit to the point of ratcheting. I just tightened them down enough so that the bolts were down tight to the beadlock ring. The next step in the instructions is to set a torque wrench 10 to 14 foot-pounds and work in a diagonal pattern. So I'm basically going to start off with a 12 o'clock, go to 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, come back, basically do 1 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and repeat that pattern all the way around. And also in this process, you want to make sure that you have an even seat of the tire around the beadlock ring. So if it's not, before you start tightening it, you need to make sure it's shifted around and so that it is even all the way around. Alright, so I just went through, finished torquing everything for the 10 to 14 foot-pound torque. And now the next step is to, again in a diagonal pattern, torque these, and we're going to be going 18 to 24 foot-pounds. So I'm going to set my torque wrench to 21 and begin torquing. So again, we're going to start from 12 o'clock and work in our diagonal pattern. So I just went through and torqued everything down 18 to 24 foot-pounds. What I did to finish up was I just went around in a circular pattern just to make sure that I didn't miss any bolts in the torquing pattern. Now granted, when I was tightening everything down, I did do a crisscross pattern. So the last step that they recommend before filling this up with air is checking with a feeler gauge to make sure there's no gap between the beadlock ring and the wheel. So I have my feeler gauge here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and take basically the smallest shim that I have, and I'm going to see if I can fit that in between the beadlock and the wheel. And it actually feels like all the way around I actually have good contact, good interaction. So that is really awesome to see. I am quite happy about that because that means that I can run these guys tomorrow as functional beadlocks. I don't have to worry about ordering the spacer that may be required with some tire combos for these wheels. So next thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and put the valve stem back in, and I'm going to go and start filling this guy up with air and check for any leaks. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my valve stem, and we'll begin filling up the tire. Alright, so I got my tire aired back up to 32 psi, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check for any air leaks. So I just got my soapy water again, I'm going to spray it around the bead, valve stem, and make sure I don't have any leaks in it. Alright, so basically what we're looking for is to see if there's any little bubbles that are coming up to the surface, and I'm not seeing anything around the outer bead. We also do need to check the inner bead as well. Now granted, the inner bead is going to be a little bit tougher to see, but with the soap content in the water, it should show any bubbles, and I'm not seeing anything, so everything looks like it worked out just right. So I'm going to go clean this guy up real quick. Alright, so there you have it. That's going to wrap it up for the install of the beadlock ring on the Dirty Life 9303 DT-1s. Honestly, pretty straightforward process. Just got to take your time, and it's kind of slow because there's a lot of bolts that you got to tighten on. But really, I mean, it's a pretty easy job to do. If you have the right tools, having these tire bars definitely help with breaking the bead and getting the tire mounted to the outside surface of the wheel, and then from there, just putting it on the beadlock ring. Alright, and one last thing that I forgot to mention is after 25 miles of driving with the beadlocks installed, you need to stop and you need to re-torque all the fasteners. So you need to make sure you do that to the 18 to 24 foot-pounds. And that's going to be important to ensure that none of the fasteners are backed out any, so that you can make sure that everything's nice and tight and not going to have any malfunctions down the road or on the trails. So I gotta say, I definitely like the look and appearance of this better than how the beauty ring looked. The tire comes closer to the outside edge, so you don't have the beauty ring basically extended out beyond the tire. Now the ring is actually tucked inside of the edge of the tire where the bead is. So I like that a lot better. Also, one other thing with the beadlock ring is that the bolt heads are actually flush or subflush, meaning that they are tucked in below the surface, the top surface of the beadlock ring, so that they should stay protected a lot better. Now it'll be interesting to see how this actually looks once we get the other 4 tires done mounted on the Jeep, and I think it's I'm excited to give these guys a try out tomorrow, and I'm not going to have to be worried about scoring up the beauty rings because I got the functional beadlock rings now, and I can even possibly run a little bit lower tire pressure because I'm not going to have to worry about blowing the outer bead. So tomorrow should be a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and get the other 4 done. So that's going to wrap up today's video, guys. So if you enjoyed today's content, please give this video a thumbs up, give it a like for me. If you have any questions, comments, feedback on this video, please drop those in the comments below. Also, let me know, what do you think of the install process for the beadlock rings? What do you think of the appearance of them versus the beauty rings? And also help me grow my channel by sharing this video with any other social media platforms and friends that you may have that are interested in these wheels and running the beadlock version. Otherwise, guys, we are VictorVectorJKU. We're taking on this build and the trail with direction and magnitude. Alright guys, have a good one. Catch you next time. Owie, my foots. Okay.